I have told this story maybe 100 times now. To my crewmates. To the young ones who join the fleet and think they already understand what courage is. To my own grandchildren, who ask me to tell it again even though they know every word. And every time I tell it, my hands shake a little. Not from fear, from the memory of it, because I was there. I saw it with my own 2 eyes, and I still don't have a clean way to explain what I felt. So let me try again, from the beginning, the way it happened. My name is Sarek Thal. I served the Vernic Ascendancy for 41 cycles. Back then I was young, loud, certain. I thought I knew what humans were. I was wrong about all of it. The station was called Halcyon Tier. It sat at the edge of the threshold belt, where 3 shipping lanes crossed and none of them belonged to anyone. A gray, ugly ring of metal spinning slow against the dark. Nobody built it to be beautiful. They built it to be useful. And it was. Everyone passed through Halcyon eventually. Traders, refugees, smugglers who called themselves traders, fleet ships stopping for fuel and repairs, every species you could name and a few you'd never heard of, all crammed into one loud, stinking, wonderful place. You could smell it before you docked. That was the joke on our ship. You know you're close to Halcyon when the air tastes like other people's cooking. I still remember the smell. Fried oil and coolant, and too many bodies breathing the same recycled air. Some kind of spiced meat from the food stalls on Deck 9. Ozone from the welding bays. It should have been unpleasant. Somehow it wasn't. It smelled like the whole galaxy in one room. We came in on the Rendaris, a mid-class escort cruiser, part of Battle Group 7. Nothing glorious. We were escorting a civilian transport carrying families, officers' families mostly, being relocated to a safer sector after the border skirmishes flared up again out past the Veil. That's an important detail, the families. Because on that transport was Commander Ashen of the Vernic 9th. And on that transport, in a little padded carry shell strapped to her chest, was her daughter. Her name was Yiri. She was 4 months old. Now, I have to tell you something about my people, so the rest makes sense. The Vernic are proud. Too proud if I'm being honest, and I'm old enough now to be honest. We are a martial people. We measure worth in discipline, in strength, in how a warrior carries themselves under pressure. We built an empire on that pride. 200 worlds, a fleet that could darken a sky. And we looked down on humans. I'm not going to soften it, we did. Humans were new to the wider galaxy back then. Soft-skinned, short-lived. No claws, no armor plating, no natural weapons at all. They came from one small blue world, and they had this way of talking too much, laughing too loud, taking foolish risks for reasons that made no sense to us. We called them AI-Vesh. Roughly it means the ones who bruise easily. It wasn't a kind word. I used it plenty. Jonah Reese, that was the human's name, though I didn't know it yet. Jonah Reese was, to me, nothing. A dock technician. A grease-stained nobody who ran fuel lines on Halcyon Tier for a living. I walked past 100 like him and never saw a single one. That's the truth, and that's the shame of it. We docked at Halcyon on what should have been an ordinary day. The transport was already there, berthed at the big civilian gantry on Deck 4. Fleet families were coming down to stretch their legs, buy things from the stalls, let the little ones see something other than a ship's gray walls for a few hours before the long jump. I had shore leave, 6 hours. I remember being annoyed it was only 6. I went down with 2 of my crewmates, Dravel and Nen. We were going to eat something that wasn't ration paste and complain about our officers, which is the traditional way a young Vernic soldier spends his leave. The concourse was packed. Deck 4 was the main artery, this huge curved corridor with shops built into both walls and a ceiling so high you could barely see the lights. People everywhere, every species, a crush of noise and color. I remember a group of human children running past, chasing each other, shrieking with laughter. I remember thinking they were loud. I remember being irritated by it. I remember Commander Ashen standing near a food stall, tall and composed in her officer's grays, with little Yuri in the carry shell against her chest. Yuri had those big Vernic infant eyes, all pupil, taking in the whole world at once. Somebody had put a little woven band around her head. She was reaching for the steam rising off the food stall, opening and closing her tiny hand, fascinated by it. Ashen was letting her reach, smiling that small, careful smile officers allow themselves in public. It was a nice moment. I remember thinking distantly that it was a nice moment. And then across the concourse I saw the human. He wasn't doing anything special. That's what I want you to understand. He was just working. Jonah Reese was crouched down beside a bank of fuel transfer conduits set into the wall about 30 paces from the food stall. Big industrial pipes, the kind that carried volatile propellant from the station's outer tanks to the docking gantries. He had a tool harness slung across his back, and his sleeves shoved up past his elbows, and he was running his hands along a seam in the pipework, frowning at it. I only noticed him because he was in the way. I remember thinking, get up, AI Vesh, you're clogging the walkway. That's it. That's the whole of the respect I gave him in that moment. He kept frowning at the pipe. He tapped it. He put the side of his head against it, listening. He pulled a scanner off his belt and ran it along the seam, and looked at the reading, and his whole face changed. I've thought about that 1,000 times since, the way his face changed. Because he knew. Before anyone else in that whole crowded concourse had the faintest idea, that grease-stained human knew something was very, very wrong. He stood up fast. He tapped his comm piece and started talking into it, quick and low, and I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the shape of him. Tense, urgent. He was gesturing at the conduit bank with his free hand, reporting it, trying to get someone on the line. Then he stopped, took the comm piece out of his ear, stared at it, tapped it again. Dead, nobody answering. I know now what happened. A pressure fault deep in the outer tank feed had been building for maybe an hour. A seal degrading. Propellant vapor pooling in a conduit that ran directly under the main concourse. The station's automated system should have caught it. They didn't. Later they found the sensor on that line had failed weeks ago, and nobody had replaced it, because it was halcyon tier and half the station ran on hope and patched wiring. Jonah Reese caught it with his own 2 hands and 1 cheap scanner, and he had maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds before a conduit full of pressurized propellant vapor found a spark and turned that section of Deck 4 into a fireball. 90 seconds, and a dead comm line, and a concourse full of people who had no idea. Here is where I tell you the part that shames me most. Because I saw him panic. I saw him look around at that crowd, hundreds of people, children, families, the food stalls, the whole loud, beautiful crush of it, and I saw him realize that he could not warn them all in time. There was no siren he could reach, no control panel close enough, no time to run and pull an alarm. And I did nothing, because I didn't know. I just saw a human acting strangely, and I looked away, back toward Dravel and Nin, and I said something stupid, something like, "These dockrats jump at their own shadows." I said that. While that man was standing in the middle of the deadliest 90 seconds of his life, deciding what to do, I made a joke. He started shouting. I heard it then, everyone did. This human, this nobody, standing on top of a maintenance housing so he was above the crowd, screaming at the top of his lungs. Move! Get back! Everyone away from the wall, move, move, move. His voice cracked from how hard he was pushing it. And people did what people do. They hesitated, they looked at each other. Who's shouting? What's he saying? Is he dangerous? A few started to drift back uncertain, most just stared. You have to understand, in a crowd, a warning is only as good as how fast people believe it. And nobody wanted to believe a panicked dock technician over their own calm afternoon. He saw them not moving. I watched him see it. I watched something break open in his face. Not fear for himself, I understand now, but a terrible frustrated grief that they weren't listening and there wasn't time to make them. And then his eyes found the one thing in that crowd he could actually reach. The baby. Little Yeri in her carry shell, right at the edge of the danger zone, closest of anyone to the conduit bank. Her mother had drifted a few steps toward the food stall, distracted for one instant, one ordinary human instant, the way any parent does, and the child was there, alone in the space between, reaching her tiny hand up toward the pretty steam. Directly in front of the pipe that was about to become a wall of fire. I want to describe what happened next as slowly as I can. Because it happened fast, faster than a heartbeat. And I have spent 40 years slowing it down in my mind so I could hold onto every piece. Jonah Reese jumped off the maintenance housing and he ran. Not away, toward the pipe, toward the fire that hadn't come yet, toward the child. He was not a young man. I know that now. He was in his 50s by human reckoning. His knees were bad. He had a limp from an old dock accident. He ran anyway. He ran like the ground was on fire behind him and everything he loved was in front of him, though he had never met this child, though this child was not his species, not his kind, not his anything. He crossed that distance in a handful of strides. Commander Ashin turned. She saw the human sprinting at her child, and she did what any warrior mother would do. Her hand went to her sidearm, because to her eyes a stranger was charging her infant. She almost shot him. She told me that herself, years later, with tears standing in her hard soldier's eyes. She said, "I almost put a round through the man who was about to save my daughter's life. I will carry that for the rest of my days." She didn't fire. Some instinct stopped her. Maybe the look on his face, maybe just chance. Jonah Reese reached Yeri. He didn't scoop her up and run. There wasn't time to run. He must have known that. The math of it must have been screaming in his head. No time to get her clear, no time to get anywhere. The blast is coming now. So he did the only thing left. He dropped to his knees, gathered that tiny alien child against his chest, curled his whole body over her like a shell, turned his back to the pipe. And the world came apart. The blast. I have been in battles, real ones. I have felt ordnance detonate close enough to rattle my teeth loose. I have heard the sound a warship makes when it dies. Nothing has ever hit me like that blast on Deck 4. It was white. That's the first thing, a white so total it wasn't even light anymore. Just a wall of pressure that picked me up off my feet from 30 paces away and threw me into Dravel, who threw into someone else. A whole row of us knocked flat like game pieces. The sound came after or maybe with it. I couldn't tell. It was too big to be a sound. It was inside my body. It was in my bones and my teeth and the backs of my eyes. Heat rolled over us. The lights blew out. Something in the ceiling came down. And then for a moment there was nothing. Just ringing. Just white. Just the strange, floating silence that comes right after something enormous before the screaming starts. The screaming started. I got up. I don't remember deciding to. My ears were bleeding. I found that out later. Everything was smoke and the emergency lights strobing red and people wailing and calling names. And the whole concourse was a wreckage of overturned stalls and broken glass and bodies. Not many bodies. That's the thing. That's the miracle of it. Because he had bought them time. Those precious few seconds of shouting of people finally starting to drift back, it had been enough to move most of the crowd just far enough. The blast had a shape to it, funneled by the corridor, and most of the killing force went up and out rather than into the thickest part of the crowd. There were injuries, burns, broken bones. It was terrible. But almost everyone lived. Almost everyone lived because one man saw it coming and screamed himself hoarse, and refused to run. I stumbled forward through the smoke. I don't know why I went toward the blast site instead of away. I've never been able to explain it. something pulled me. And there at the center of it, where the fire had been hottest, there was Jonah Reese. He was on his knees. Still on his knees in almost exactly the position I'd last seen him, curled forward, hunched over, utterly still. His back I can't, even now. His back was burned so badly that his coveralls had fused to it. The tool harness had melted. There was blood and worse than blood and the smell. I stopped a few paces away. I couldn't make my legs go further. I thought he was dead. I was certain he was dead. No one could take a blast like that at their back and live. It wasn't possible. And then I heard it. A sound coming from underneath him. Small, muffled, furious. Crying. The high, healthy, outraged wail of a 4-month-old infant who has been frightened half out of her mind and is telling the whole galaxy about it. Yuri was alive. He had held. Through the blast, through the fire, through pain I cannot let myself imagine, his body had held the shape of a shelter. His back had taken everything so that not one spark, not 1 degree of that killing heat, reached the child underneath. And he was still holding her. His arms were still locked around her, even now. I fell to my knees beside him. I said something, I don't know what. Some Vernic word for the dead, or a prayer, or just his name, which I didn't even know yet. And Jonah Reese lifted his head. He was alive. I looked into his eyes and he was alive, and the look in them, I have no words in my language or yours for the look in that man's eyes. There was pain there so vast it should have shattered him. But underneath the pain there was something else, something calm. Something almost like relief. His lips moved. I leaned close. My ear, the one that was still working, was right against his mouth. Is Sheeta cough blood? Is the baby okay? That's what he said. Lying there with his back burned to ruin, with his life pouring out of him onto the deck plating, the first words out of that human's mouth were about the child. Not help me, not the pain, not why me. Is the baby okay? I couldn't answer him. I had no voice. My throat had closed up completely. So I did the only thing I could. I reached under him, as gently as I have ever done anything, and I helped him open his arms. And there was Yuri, perfect, untouched, not a mark on her, not a hair singed, screaming her lungs out, red-faced and furious and completely, gloriously alive. I lifted her up so he could see. Jonah Reese looked at that child, that Vernic child, that little stranger, that daughter of a people who had never once shown his kind respect, and he smiled. He smiled. Good, he whispered, good, loud ones, live longest. And he almost laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough and his head sagged, and I thought that was the end of him right there. It wasn't, but it was close. Then everything happened at once. Commander Ashen came out of the smoke like a storm. She'd been thrown by the blast too, cut across the forehead, half her uniform scorched. She saw her daughter in my arms, and she made a sound I have never heard a Vernic officer make before or since. This raw, broken, animal sound of a mother who thought her child was dead and just found out otherwise. She snatched Yuri from me, clutched her, sank down onto the deck with the child pressed to her chest, shaking, saying her daughter's name over and over. And then she saw Jonah Reese. She saw the human on his knees in the wreckage, ruined, dying, and she understood. In one instant she understood all of it. What he had done. What he had put himself between. What his body had absorbed so that hers would be whole. Commander Ashen of the Vernic Ninth, decorated warrior, veteran of 9 campaigns, a woman I had watched face down enemy fleets without blinking. Set her daughter down safe in the crook of one arm, and with the other hand, reached out and took the burned, broken hand of a human dock technician and pressed her forehead to it. The highest honor my people have, the forehead to the hand, we give it to fallen heroes, to the honored dead, to warriors whose names are carved into the halls of our capital. She gave it to Jonah Reese, right there in the smoke and the blood, and she wept while she did it. The medics reached us then, human medics from the station. They swarmed him, started shouting numbers at each other the way medics do. One of them shoved me back, and I let myself be shoved. I stood there in the ruined concourse, ears ringing, blood down the side of my face, and I watched them fight for that man's life. And I realized my own face was wet. Dravel found me, and then, they were battered but alive. Dravel put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Did you see? Sarek, did you see what he?" I couldn't answer, I just nodded. Around us the survivors were sitting up, helping each other, staring at the place where the human had knelt. Word was already moving through the crowd the way word does. The dock worker, he knew. He warned us. He shielded the officer's child with his own body. He's still alive. They're taking him to medical. A hush was falling over that whole broken concourse. A strange, heavy, reverent hush. Every species there. Every kind of person. All of them in that moment looking at the same spot on the deck with the same expression. I did not have a word for what we were all feeling. I have one now. Oh. They didn't think he would survive the night. The station's medical bay was overwhelmed. Dozens of wounded. They stabilized who they could and shipped the worst cases up to the fleet ships because our medical facilities were better than anything Halcyon had. Jonah Reese was the worst case of all. They brought him aboard the Rendaris, onto my ship, into my ship's medical deck, which I had walked past 1,000 times and never entered. I entered it that night. I don't know what I thought I was doing there. I wasn't family. I wasn't crew of his. I was nobody to him, just an alien soldier who had happened to be close when the world ended. But I couldn't stay away. Something in me needed to know if he lived. The medical deck was quiet and dim and smelled of antiseptic. He was in the central bay, floating in a suspension tank, his whole back and shoulders encased in region mesh, tubes and lines running out of him in every direction. He looked so small in there, so fragile. The ones who bruise easily. I stood at the glass and I looked at him and I thought about that word. That word I'd used 1,000 times, and I was so ashamed I could hardly breathe. Commander Ashen was there too, sitting in a hard chair beside the tank, still in her scorched uniform, her forehead bandaged. She hadn't left. Yuri was asleep against her, safe, whole. Ashen was just sitting there, watching the human breathe, keeping vigil like he was one of her own. She saw me, looked me up and down, saw a young soldier who clearly didn't belong there. She didn't tell me to leave. She said quietly, "Sit." So I sat, and we kept the vigil together. He made it through the night. Then through the next. Then through a week that the medics called impossible more than once. Human bodies, it turns out, are not so soft as we believed. There is a stubbornness in them, a refusal. He should have died 12 times, and every time he simply didn't. The medics started calling him the stubborn one. They said it with something like love. Word of what he'd done spread beyond our ship, beyond Halcyon Tier. It went up the chain, the way stories of true things do, until it reached places I never imagined it could reach. Because Yuri, the child he'd saved, her mother was Commander Ashen, and Commander Ashen's commanding officer was Fleet Admiral Raviksorn. And Fleet Admiral Raviksorn was, at that time, one of the most powerful warriors in the entire Vernic Ascendancy. The Admiral heard the story, and the Admiral did something that had not been done in living memory. He diverted the fleet. Not one ship, the fleet, Battle Group 7 and Battle Group 3, which was operating nearby, and the Admiral's own flagship, the Caravest, which was a dreadnought the size of a small moon, all of it, redirected to Halcyon Tier. Officially it was for resupply and casualty support. That's what the log said. Everyone knew the truth. They came for the human. I remember the day they arrived. I was on the observation deck of the Rendaris, and I watched the Caravest drop out of jump space, this vast black shape blotting out the stars, escorted by a dozen cruisers, and I felt my chest go tight. I had never seen the flagship this close. Most Vernick never did in their whole lives. It had come for a human dock technician. By then, Jonah Reese was awake. Weak, in terrible pain, though he never once complained about it, which drove the medics half-mad. Unable to walk yet, but awake and lucid. And this is the part that still makes me smile, cracking jokes at the medical staff, learning all their names, asking about their families. He asked about mine, too. By then I was visiting every day. I couldn't stay away. He'd started calling me the big guy who keeps hovering, and then just big guy. And then, eventually, my actual name once I finally gave it to him. Sarek, he'd say. Sarek, my friend, come sit. Tell me about the ugly ship you fly. The AI Vesh, the one who bruises easily, calling me friend and meaning it. I have been called many things by many people. Nothing has ever landed on me the way that word landed from that man, in that bed. When Admiral Ravik Sorn came aboard, the whole ship went to attention. He came to the medical deck personally, in full ceremonial armor, the black and silver, the campaign marks, the whole terrible splendor of a Vernick fleet admiral. Behind him came his honor guard. Behind them, Commander Ashen with Yiri. Behind her, a growing crowd of officers and crew who had found reasons to be near the medical deck that day, all of them wanting to see. I was there. I had earned a place near the front, somehow, in the strange way that vigil keepers do. The Admiral stopped at the foot of Jonah Reese's bed. For a long moment he just looked at the human. This enormous armored warrior and this small burned man propped up on pillows, looking back at him with tired, steady, unafraid eyes. I held my breath. The whole deck held its breath. And then Fleet Admiral Ravik Sorn, commander of the Vernick Grand Fleet, victor of the Kellen Reach, a warrior whose name mothers used to frighten children into obedience. He knelt. He went down on one knee, in his ceremonial armor, before a human. You have to understand what that meant. A Vernick admiral does not kneel, not to enemies, not to allies, not to his own emperor. The emperor kneels to him in the old rites. There is no one in the galaxy a Vernick admiral kneels to. He knelt to Jonah Reese. And behind him his honor guard knelt, and behind them the officers, and behind them the crew. Rank after rank after rank, going down onto one knee, all the way back through the deck, and I would learn later, out through the corridors, where those who couldn't fit inside had gathered and knelt too. The whole ship knelt. And it didn't stop with our ship. Word went out on the fleet channels, and on the Caravast, and on every cruiser and escort and support vessel in that vast gathered fleet. Thousands upon thousands of Vernick warriors went to one knee at their stations. An entire fleet, kneeling, for a man who ran fuel lines on a broken-down station and had never in his whole life been anyone important at all. Jonah Reese looked at the Admiral kneeling before him, and I watched him not understand it at first. He looked confused. He looked almost embarrassed. He wasn't built for this. He had no idea what he'd done was worth this. That was the whole beauty of the man. He genuinely did not understand why anyone would make a fuss. He said, you don't have to do that. I just did what anybody would do. And the Admiral, still kneeling, said something I will remember until the day I die. He said, no, not anybody. We would not have. We looked at your people and we saw weakness. You looked at my officer's child, a stranger, an alien, nothing to you, and you gave your body to the fire so that she might live. You have taught the Vernick ascendancy what strength is. We had it wrong for 10,000 years. You corrected us in 90 seconds. He reached out and took Jonah Reese's ruined hand in both of his armored ones, as gently as a father, and he pressed his forehead to it. The forehead to the hand. The highest honor my people have. Given by the highest warrior my people had, to the lowest ranked man on a forgotten station. I was crying. I wasn't the only one. half the deck was. Jonah Reese looked around at all of us, this whole armored fleet on its knees, weeping, and I think, finally, some piece of it reached him, some understanding of what he'd become to us. And do you know what he did? He laughed, soft and warm and a little bit disbelieving, and he said, "Well, this is going to be a hell of a story for my grandkids." And there were tears in his eyes too, but he was smiling, that same crooked human smile I'd first seen when he looked at the child he'd saved. Then he said, "Somebody bring me that baby. I want to see her again properly. Last time I saw her she was mad enough to spit." And Commander Ashen carried Yiri to him and placed her in his arms, the same arms that had shielded her. And this time there was no fire, no smoke, no blast. Just a burned old human holding a healthy alien child in a quiet room full of kneeling warriors. Yiri grabbed his finger, held on tight. He looked down at her and his whole face went soft, and he whispered something I only just caught. "Yeah," he said, "you were worth it every bit." He lived. I want you to know that. Every time I tell this story, someone assumes it ends in a grave, and it doesn't, and I love that it doesn't. Jonah Reese lived. The region work took the better part of a year. His back was never right again, it never would be, and he carried that scarring for the rest of his life. But he lived. The Ascendancy would not hear of him going back to fuel lines. The Admiral saw to it personally. Jonah Reese was given a home on the Vernic capital world, a pension, an honor title that had never before been granted to an outsider. They named him Shale Varen. It means, roughly, shield of the people. It is the same title we give to warriors who die defending the innocent. He was the first living being to hold it, and the first non-Vernic ever. He hated the fuss. Loved to complain about the fuss, but I noticed he never gave the title back. Commander Ashen became something like a sister to him. Yiri grew up calling him Uncle Jonah, in careful, practiced human words, because he taught her his language himself. She would sit on his lap for hours while he told her stories about a small blue planet very far away. And me. I stayed his friend, his stubborn, hovering, big guy friend for the rest of his days. I was there when he grew old. I was there, an old soldier by then myself, when he finally passed quietly in his sleep on the Vernic homeworld, with Ashen holding one hand and a grown Yiri holding the other. The whole fleet flew dark that day. Lights out across every ship, in the old mourning custom we save for our greatest fallen. An entire fleet gone dark. For a man who once ran fuel lines on a station nobody remembers the name of. I've thought a lot over the years about that word, AI Vesh, the ones who bruise easily. We had it exactly backwards. Yes, humans bruise, they burn, they break. Their bodies fail where ours would hold. In every way we ever measured strength, they are weaker than us. But we were measuring the wrong thing. Because when the fire came, it wasn't the strongest of us who ran toward that child. It wasn't a Vernic warrior in battle plate. It wasn't me, standing 30 paces away making jokes. It was the soft one, the one who bruised easily. The one with nothing to gain and everything to lose, who looked at a stranger's baby and decided, without a heartbeat of hesitation, that his own body was a fair price for her life. That's not weakness. I don't have a word big enough for what that is. So that's the story, the way it really happened, the way I saw it 41 cycles ago on a broken-down station at the edge of nowhere. My grandchildren always ask me the same question when I finish. They ask, "Grandfather, weren't you scared?" And I tell them the truth. I say, I was scared of the wrong things for most of my life. I was scared of looking weak, scared of being soft, scared of anyone who wasn't like me. And then I watched a soft, weak stranger of a man kneel in the fire and become the strongest thing I ever saw. He wasn't afraid of any of the things I was afraid of. He was only afraid of one thing. He was afraid the baby might not make it. That was the whole of him. That was everything. They asked him once near the end why he did it. Some fleet historian, recording his account for the archives. Why did you run toward the blast? Why did you shield a child who wasn't yours, of a species that had never shown you a moment's kindness? Jonah Rees was very old by then, slow to answer. He thought about it for a long while. And then he shrugged, the way he always did, that crooked human smile pulling at his scarred face. And he said the thing I have carried in my heart for the rest of my long, long life. He said, she was small and she was scared and she needed someone to stand between her and the fire. That's all. You don't have to be big to do that. You just have to be willing. You just have to be willing.